We're now ready to go through our first campaign turn. Looking at the sequence of play, you see that the first thing we do is advance the turn counter. It's now the first of our 6 campaign turns. Looking back to the sequence of play, you'll see that the next step is the U.S. resupply step. During this step, I gained 17 supply points as well as 8 reinforcement points. Those are my 17 supply points, my 8 reinforcement points. The first thing I'm going to do is use my reinforcement points to purchase new forces. These forces will be available for me to use this game turn. I have 8 reinforcement points to spend, and while I can save some of them for later game turns, I'm going to spend them all because things are pretty desperate for me right now. I'm going to spend 4 points to buy this battleship. I'm going to spend 1 point to buy this infantry, another point to buy another infantry, as well as 2 points to buy this Australian bomber group, for a total of 8 points. 4 points, 1 point, 1 point, and 2 points. So that is all 8 of my points, which are now spent. I now place the forces that I just purchased. All U.S. forces begin on the west coast, and the Australian force begins in Australia. The next step is U.S. scouting. This is where I can pay some supply points in order to get a preview of where the Japanese might be moving some of their forces. Every scouting attempt that I do uses 1 counter and uses up 1 of my supply points. I'm going to scout twice this turn. I'm going to place 1 scouting counter here in the Caroline Islands and a 2nd scouting counter in Japan. I have to spend 2 supply points in order to pay for those 2 scouting attempts. This now leaves me with 15 supply points to spend this turn. I'm going to roll for my scouting attempt on the Caroline Islands. To do that, I roll a Japanese orders die roll and consult the chart to see what those forces are going to do. My die roll is a 9. That means that they are going to do a reinforce order. They're going to move to an objective with Japanese forces ashore. They're going to move 2 ships, 1 infantry, and 2 land-based aircraft. So I look around to see which possible area they're going to move to. So I look for objectives that have Japanese forces already ashore. Well, that can be the Gilbert Islands. It can also be New Guinea. All of the other objectives do not have Japanese forces ashore. So I'm going to go low-high. On a roll of a 1 through 5, they're going to New Guinea. On a 6 through 10, they're going to the Gilberts. I get a 6, so those forces are going to move to the Gilbert Islands. So I move 2 ships, and these are the top 2 ships off of the pile. They also move 1 infantry, except there's only 1 infantry left on the island, and they never move their last infantry or land-based aircraft. And since they're not moving to an area with U.S. forces, I don't collect free battalions for them. They also get to move 2 land-based aircraft, but you'll see there are no land-based aircraft in the Carolines, so they don't move. To show that those ships are not really at the Gilbert Islands yet, I use the scouting counter and I show that they are in transit. This way I don't get confused with Japanese forces that move later on in the turn. I'm now going to roll for my scouting attempt for the main Japanese island itself. I now roll and I get a 6. That means that they are going to move east. They move 1 closer to Hawaii that has Japanese forces ashore. I can move up to 4 ships, 2 infantry, and 2 land-based aircraft. There's only 1 place they can move to in order to satisfy their movement requirement, and that's the island of Iwo Jima. So I grab the top 4 ships off the pile. That's an aircraft carrier, a cruiser, a destroyer, and another carrier. All of these stacks were randomized at the beginning of the game. I place them by Iwo Jima. I next move 2 infantry, which they do have those available. So the infantry also move. They can also move up to 2 land-based aircraft, and they don't have any, so those don't move. And I flip this counter to show that that fleet is in transit heading towards Iwo Jima. This completes the scouting step. Now I'm going to conduct U.S. movement. It's now time for me to move my U.S. forces. Every counter I move costs me 1 supply point, and I need to kind of anticipate where the Japanese are going to be moving on their turn. I'd like to reinforce the South Pacific, So the first counter I'm going to move is this Australian bomber group. Because it's Australian, it can only move to areas that have an Australian flag. So I'm going to move it over here to the Solomons to help out those guys. That's one of my points. I'd also like to move another air group over to Midway. Midway has an airfield rating of 2. That means I can never have more than 2 U.S. air groups on that island. I already have one, so I'm going to move a second air group over there. That'll be a second point for me. Just in case if the Japanese go to the Solomon Islands, I want to do some pre-positioning of forces there to help defend it. So I'm going to move in an air group. That's my third move. I'm also going to be moving in an infantry. Now because he's moving during this step, I put him on a transport because Japanese forces might be showing up there. That's my fourth point. I'm also going to move in a small naval force just in case. That will consist of the aircraft carrier Lexington, a cruiser group, and a destroyer. So that has me spending 7 supply points so far, leaving me with 8. For my final move, I want to move some forces into New Guinea to try to drive the Japanese out of there. I'm going to start by moving an infantry and a battalion from the west coast, and I'm going to put them on a transport, positioning them here. I'm also going to move a battleship from the west coast. That's 3 points. And then for 3 more points, I'm going to send a cruiser, a destroyer, and the carrier Enterprise, also over to New Guinea. And that totally costs me 6 points, leaving me with 2 points left over. This completes the U.S. movement. In the next video, we will cover the Japanese movement.